A Body of Doctrinal Divinity, Book 1, by Dr. John Gill, Chapter 24, of the Sufficiency and Perfection of God, narrated by David Clark. From this attribute of God, he has one of the names Shaddai, which signifies who is sufficient, or all-sufficient, of which, see Chapter 3, three things may be observed under this attribute. 1. That God is a self-sufficient being, and needs not anything from without himself to support himself, or to make himself happy. He is the first of beings, the first and the last. Before him there is no God formed, nor will there be any after him. From everlasting to everlasting, he is God. And therefore his existence is not owing to any, nor has he received any assistance or support from any being. Being self-existent, he must be self-subsistent, as he existed of himself and subsists in and of himself. Millions and millions of ages, even an eternity, inconceivable to us, alone before any other existed. He must be self-sufficient, and then so to all eternity. He is an infinite and all-comprehending being. So what is infinite, nothing can be added. If anything was wanting in him, he would be finite. If there was any excellency in another which is not in him, he would not be infinite, and so not God. Being infinite, he is incomprehensible by others, and comprehends in himself all excellencies, perfection, and happiness, and therefore self-sufficient. Who hath first given to him, and it shall be recompensed to him again, for of him, and through him, and for him are all things. Romans 11, 35, 36. God is the summum bonum, the chief good, and has all that is good in him. He is good essentially, originally, and inderivatively, the source and fountain of all goodness. Every good and perfect gift comes from him, James 1, 17, and therefore must have a fullness of goodness in him, sufficient for himself, as well as for his creatures, and can receive nothing from them. Otherwise he would not be the independent being he is. All have their dependence on him, and owe their being and their preservation of it to him, but he depends on none, which he would if he stood in need of, or received anything from them. He is possessed of all perfections, as has been abundantly shown in the preceding chapters, and is sufficiently happy in them. He is perfect and entire, wanting nothing, and therefore self-sufficient. He is the fountain. Creatures and what they have are streams, and it would be as absurd for him to need them or anything from them as for the fountain to need its streams. Besides, God, in his divine persons, God Father, Son, and Spirit, have enough within themselves to give the utmost, yea, infinite complacency, delight, and satisfaction amongst themselves and to another, and had before any creatures were made, and would have had if none had been made, and so ever will. The Father delighted in the Son, the brightness of his glory, and the express image of his person, the Son in the Father, before whom he was always rejoicing, when as yet no creature existed, and both in the blessed Spirit proceeding from them, and he in them. Proverbs 8:30. The creation adds nothing at all to the perfections and happiness of God, nor makes the least alteration in him. It is indeed said, Thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelations 4:11. But pleasure, that does not signify delight, satisfaction, happiness, as if they were made for the sake of that in God, to add unto it and to increase it, but the good will and pleasure of God, and should be rendered, by thy will they are and were created. God has made all things for himself, that is, for his glory, his manifestive glory, but then this adds nothing to his essential glory and happiness. The heavens, and so the other parts of the creation, declare his glory, but to whom? Not to himself. He needs not such declaration. He knows perfectly his own glory, which is always invariably the same, but to angels and men, that they may contemplate it and receive benefit by it. The invisible perfections of God, his eternal power and Godhead, are seen and understood by the things that are made, but not by God himself, who needs no such glass to view them in, but by men, and the design thereof is to make some better and happier, and others inexcusable. All creatures stand in need of God, to supply them and support them. They consist in him, and upheld by the word of his power, live and move and have their beings in him, but he stands in need of none of them, being self-sufficient. And as he does not stand in need of the creation in general, so not of men and angels, in particular not of men, nor of any service of others, which can add nothing to his perfection and happiness, not of their worship. For he is not worshipped by men's hands, as though he needed anything. No, not their worship. Acts 17:25. He is, and ought to be, the sole object of their worship. It is their duty to worship him, and that in a spiritual manner suitable to his nature, as a spirit. But then not he, but they are the gainers by it. The ordinances of divine service under the former dispensation were, and those under the present are, for the instruction, edification, comfort and peace of the worshippers, who are hereby led into communion with God and the enjoyment of his gracious presence, and so find it is good for them to wait upon him in them. But what benefit does he receive thereby? He stands in no need of their prayers. It is both their duty and privilege to pray to him, the God of our life, for the mercies of it, temporal, spiritual, and he is pleased to express his approbation of it and to resent a contrary behaviour. But who has the advantage of it? Not he, but they, for whose sake is the throne of grace set up, not for his own sake, but for the sake of his people, that they may come to and find grace and mercy to help them in their time of need. Nor does he want their praises, nor is he benefited by them. They are his due, and it becomes men to give them to him. And he condescends to accept of them, and express his well-pleasedness in them. But then the celebration of his praises adds nothing to his perfection and happiness, but to the perfection and happiness of men, who are made better thereby. Nor is the obedience of righteousness of men of any profit to God. Obedience to his commands ought to be yielded, and works of righteousness joined by him ought to be performed. But then when we have done all we can, we are but unprofitable servants to him. If thou art righteous, what givest thou him? Or what receiveth he of thy hand? Such works and such righteousnesses may be profitable to men, and is the reason why they are to be done. But can a man be profitable unto God? As he that is wise may be profitable to himself or to others. Is it any pleasure to the Almighty that thou art righteous? Or is it gain to him that thou makest thyself perfect? Job 22:2, 3, 35:7, 8, Luke 17:10, or Titus 3:8. Should it be said that God is glorified by men in the worship of him, by prayers to him, and praising of him, by obedience to his will, and by living soberly, righteously, and godly, John 15:9, Matthew 5:17, it is very true. These make for the manifestation and display of his glory among men, but make no addition to his essential glory and happiness. The same may be said of the worship and services of angels, of the imperfection and unprofitableness of which to God they are sensible themselves, and blush and cover their faces while performing them. Isaiah 6:2-3. And though they are indeed made use of as instruments in providence, but not in creation, in the preservation of God's people, and in the destruction of their enemies, and in other affairs of this world, yet not of necessity, but of choice. It is not because needs them and cannot do without them, but because it is his will and pleasure, just as he makes use of the ministry and ministers of the word, for the conversion of sinners and comfort of saints. Not that he needs them, nor could not convert the one and convert the other without them. For it is certain he can, and often does, but because these are the means and instruments he chooses to make use of. 1 Corinthians 5:3-7. There's a very remarkable expression in Psalm 16:2-3. My goodness extendeth not to thee, but to the saints that are in the earth, and to the excellent, in whom is all my delight. Which is spoken by David of himself only, indeed confirms what has been before asserted, that the goodness of men, even of the best of men, is of no advantage to God himself, but to others. The goodness of David in the preparing of the building of the temple and providing for the worship of God in it, in composing hymns and psalms to be sung by men, and in the whole of his life and conversation, was of no avail to the essential happiness of God, but was of use to the saints, both for their profit and by way of example to them. But is spoken by him in the person of Christ, as it is clear the words are, then they carry in them an higher sense still, as that the holiness of Christ as man added nothing to the perfection of God and his nature, that the obedience he yielded in it was for the sake of men, who had the advantage of it, and not God, that the satisfaction he made to divine justice for his people stood in no need of it. He could have glorified his justice in the destruction of them, as well as the apostate angels, the old world and Sodom and Gomorrah, though the debt of obedience paid to the law and the debt of punishment paid to justice in their room has magnified the law and made it honourable. The benefits of this redound to men only, who hereby have their debts paid, their scores cleared, and they stand free and discharged in open court. Though the glory of God is greatly displayed in salvation by Christ, the goodwill is to men, and all the good things he is come as high priest, and that comes thereby, come not to God, but to men, as pardon, peace, righteousness, eternal life. God is then self-sufficient being and needs nothing from without himself, nor does he receive anything. 2. God is an all-sufficient being and has enough within himself to communicate to his creatures. He is able to do whatsoever he pleases, to fulfill all his engagements and promises, and to do exceedingly abundantly above all that men ask or think. And so communicative and diffusive is his goodness, that he extends to all his creatures, and every good and perfect gift comes from him, which is a full proof of his all-sufficiency, and which appears in his gifts of nature and providence. For he gives life and breath to all things, to his creatures, Acts 17:25. A painter may paint as near as life he can be, and a sculpture may give a statue its just features and frame its limbs in proper symmetry and proportion, but neither of them can give life and breath. But God is sufficient to do this, and has done it. And he breathed into Adam the breath of life, and gave life to all his posterity, and is with great propriety called the God of their life. Psalm 42:8. And he is sufficient to support, maintain, preserve the life he has given, and does, as long as he pleases. Job 10:12, 12:10, Psalm 66:9, and to provide for men all the necessaries of life, as food and raiment, which Job was fully satisfied of, and therefore covenanted with God for them. Genesis 28:20, and to take care of all the creatures, the fowls of heaven, and of the mountains, the beasts of the field and forest, and the cattle on 1,000 hills, which as they are his property, they are his care, and a large family they be, to provide for every day and food suitable for them, and yet this he is sufficient to do and does. All wait upon him, and he gives them their portion of meat in due season. Psalm 50:10, 11, 104:27, 28, 145:15, 147:9. Yea, he is sufficient to govern the whole world, nor does he need any wisdom, counsel, advice, and assistance in it from any of his creatures. Isaiah 40:13-14. He disposes and overrules all things as he pleases, and not only influences, directs, and manages in matters of greatest importance, which concern kings and governors of kingdoms and states, but even those of the lowest consideration and use, and so in all things intervening, or of a class between the one and the other. Psalm 22:28, Proverbs 8:15, 16, Matthew 10:29, 30. In a view of which it may be well said, O the depth of the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, with all sufficiency must be possessed of. Romans 11:33. God appears to be all sufficient in the communications of his grace. He is the God of all grace, and able to cause all grace to abound towards his people, and to supply all their wants after the rich and glorious plenitude, and all sufficiency in himself by Jesus Christ. He has stored the covenant with all the blessings of grace. He has presented Christ, the head and mediator of it, with all the blessings of goodness. He has blessed his people in him with all spiritual blessings, and given them grace in him before the world began, and caused the fullness of it to dwell in him, which is always sufficient for them in all ages and periods of time, for them of all nations and kingdoms throughout the world, for them in every state and condition of life, for all believers, weak or strong, and he has a sufficiency of it for all saving purposes, for their acceptance with God and their justification before him, for the remission of their sins and the cleansing of their souls, and for the supply of all their wants, while they are in a state of imperfection, and he has a sufficiency of it to communicate at all times. When they are called to service, extraordinary, ordinary, and ordinary or extraordinary, to do or suffer for his name's sake in times of affliction, temptation, desertion, and in the hour of death, to bear up under and carry them through all and bring them safe to his kingdom and glory. 1 John 14, 16:2, Corinthians 12:9, Philippians 4:19. 3. God is a perfect being, entirely perfect and wanting nothing. Be ye perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5:48. His nature is perfect. The more simple and uncompounded any being is, the more perfect it is. God is a spirit. Actus simplicissimus, the most pure, spiritual, simple and uncompounded being, and therefore the most perfect. No perfection of deity is wanting in him, as appears from what has been under consideration. There is a fullness of the Godhead which dwells in Christ, and the same therefore must be in each of the divine person, and especially in God, essentially considered, and every attribute of his is perfect. He is perfectly immutable. There is no variableness in him, nor shadow of turning. James 1:17. He is perfect in knowledge, knows himself and all creatures and things perfectly. Job 37:16. And there is a depth in his wisdom as well as in his knowledge, which is unfathomable. Romans 11:33. And as for his power, nothing is too hard for him, nor is his hand shortened that it cannot save. Isaiah 40:26, 28:59:1. And his holiness is without the least tarnish. In him are light, purity, holiness, and no darkness of sin at all. 1 John 1:5. All the perfections and excellencies that are in the creatures, angels and men, are in the most perfect manner in him agreeable to his nature, as they must, since they all come from him. James 1:17. And though there are some things which are excellencies in creatures, as the reasoning faculties in men and faith in the Christian, which properly speaking cannot be said to be in God, yet these are such as would be imperfections in him, since the former supposes some want of knowledge, which the reasoning power is employed to find out, and the latter is but an obscure knowledge, and proceeds from the authority from another, neither of which can be supposed in God, and whose knowledge is clear and perfect, and to whom no authority is superior. And therefore the want of them does not infer any imperfection in him, but, on the contrary, the highest perfection. Once more, he is a rock, and his work is perfect. Deuteronomy 32:4. His work of creation is finished, and so is the work of redemption. And ere long, the mystery of providence will be finished, and the work of grace on the heart of every one of his elect. And as for God, His way is perfect. Psalm 18:30. His ways of providence are without any just blame. Every path of mercy and truth he pursues. He never leaves till he has finished it. And the way he prescribes to his people to walk in is perfect, and the scriptures which are of him are able to make the man of God perfect. Revelations 15:4, Psalm 25:10, 19:7, 2 Timothy 1:16-17.